This day in sports history. It's June 13th, and on this day in 1993, there was chaos and controversy in Detroit. Before the IndyCar Series, before the Indy Racing League, before it was even the Champ Car Series, guys who raced Indy cars drove in the kart series for most of the 80s and the 90s. Well, on this day, the kart series was racing in Detroit at the old course on Belle Isle. Now, this was just the second year that they had raced on this course. The circuit was known for being narrow, difficult to navigate, and tough to pass. Nigel Mansell had come over to race Indy cars from England instead of defending his Formula One World Championship that he'd won back in 1992. Mansell had won 2 races already in the 93 season, and he was the pole sitter for this race. With the tight turns, it was key to get a great start. So, being new to the kart series, Mansell had lots of questions for the race officials several hours prior to the start of the race. He'd had a problem on a restart a few weeks earlier at the Indy 500 that cost him a win there. Well, here as the pole sitter, he wanted to make sure that he understood how the start of the race was going to go. Now, when he walked away from that conversation, he thought he understood. Even though they both spoke English, something got lost in translation.
Green flag, and here we go. As look at the 2 Penske cars jump around Nigel Mansell on the start, and we're off and running already. Fittipaldi at the front, followed by Paul Tracy, and now Bobby Rahal comes up to challenge Nigel Mansell as the fight for...
So Mansell felt that the Penske cars of Emerson Fittipaldi and Paul Tracy jumped the start, negating his right as the pole sitter. Mansell's team manager asked for a restart of the race, but that request was shot down and the race continued. With 8 laps to go, teammates Danny Sullivan and Al Unser Jr. were running 1-2 and were nose to tail around the racetrack. After going through a local yellow section, Little Al saw an opening and he went for it.
Pass right there because of the vehicle. That's also one of the rough sections of the race course. But now they're again in contact. And Little Al's going to look. It looks like they touch for a second there. Little Al comes to the inside. They continue side by side. Al Unser Jr. has to drop behind as Danny Sullivan has the better line into the corner. But is Little Al anxious to try? You bet he is. Well, that's about as hard a...
So the important takeaway from that piece of audio is that Unser Jr. hit several cones lining the race course. But here's the thing, he didn't improve his position on the track. Instead, as you heard, he dropped back into second place. But track officials were hard and swift with punishment for what they saw as a rules infraction.
Now, how can you do for knocking down a cone? Back in Detroit, Rick Gallis literally screaming at one of the officials. Did you hear that?
Let's see if we can get a word with Rick. Rick, what did they tell you? The report that we're getting is that there was a cone that was knocked down, and now they're going to initiate a stop-and-go penalty on Al Unser Jr.
A stop-and-go penalty under green flag conditions, especially this late in the race, is punitive, especially for such a minor infraction. And the argument could be made that he was forced off the racetrack by his teammate. But rules are rules no matter how you interpret them, and Little Al served his penalty, and it dropped him out of contention for the win, and he finished 6th. Now, there was a lot of craziness throughout this race, and especially in the final 2 laps, but I want to focus on the controversy. After the race, Little Al was not happy with his teammate for forcing him off the racetrack, or with race officials who penalized him.
Well, I don't know what to say. The only thing I can say is I got penalized for running over cones that somebody else put me into, trying to block me to pass down a straightaway, and so I need to talk to Wally Dallenbach and find out what kind of racing are we doing here, and that's it.
So you heard him mention Wally Dallenbach, and he was the race steward for this one. He was a man that everybody wanted to vent some frustration with after the race.
You think Little Al's angry? Look at the group that's gathered around Chief Steward Wally Dallenbach. Roger Penske, Rick Gallis, Stefan Johansson, Rick Mears, all talking about the way this race today was handled. But while there are some angry people,
it was a messy race from start to finish, with a good number of drivers wondering just what the rules actually were. This episode is brought to you by the Sterling Soap Company. Sterling Soap is 100% natural and with a variety of bath soaps, shave soaps, beard balm, lotions, cologne, and many more personal care products in a large variety of scents, you're sure to find something that's perfect for you or that special someone in your life. Check them out at sterlingsoap.com. Have you ever wanted to play a practice round with a couple of PGA Tour pros? How about stepping onto the field wearing Yankee pinstripes at the Major League All-Star Game? What would you say about a chance to join the layup line with your favorite NBA team? Sounds like a dreamy experience at a fantasy camp, right? Well, yeah, but what if I told you there was a guy who did all of those things but did not sign up for any pricey camp experience? Instead, he just strolled into these and other situations with the confidence that he belonged there and actually did them. His name was Baer Bremen, and on this day in 1979, the Great Imposter, as he would become known, played a practice round with a couple of pros getting ready to play in the U.S. Open. At this point, Bremen was just getting started in his role of playing sports imposter. After joining the layup line as a San Diego Clipper at the 1979 NBA All-Star Game and getting a couple of shots and rebounds alongside the likes of Kareem and David Thompson, Bremen turned his focus to golf. The U.S. Open was played that year at Inverness Golf Club in Toledo, Ohio. 2 days prior to the first round, Wayne Levy and Kip Byrne were playing a practice round. Jerry Pate was supposed to have joined that pair at some point, but instead it was Bremen who showed up at the turn to play the back nine with the pair. Bremen was a supposed 7 handicapper, and if that part is true, it meant he had some game, but obviously not the caliber to have made it through the qualifying process to make it to the U.S. Open. At one point, though, he had another friend who was following the group to ask for his autograph to make it look more convincing. But it didn't take long for the other 2 golfers to start wondering who this joker was. Levy said later, "We thought he was playing bad because he was an amateur. He told us it was his first Open, but we didn't ask any questions. Just what he'd been doing, where he'd been, stuff like that." Bremen was pleasant and affable, but it was obvious he did not belong. A sports writer covering the event that week followed the group and requested an interview with Bremen so he could write a piece on the worst golfer he's ever seen at a U.S. Open. After playing 9 holes virtually unnoticed by security or tournament officials, Bremen came clean with Levy and Byrne, doffed his cap to the rogue gallery that happened to be nearby, shook their hands, wished them luck, and then he departed. Bremen would go on to make appearances this same week in practice rounds at the U.S. Open the following year at Baltusrol in New Jersey, and again in 1985 at Oakland Hills in Michigan. In his 1980 appearance, Bremen played so badly, a patron asked PGA Tour Commissioner P.J. Boatwright how someone so terrible managed to make it through qualifying. In 1985, with help from a friend at Oakland Hills, Bremen snuck through some bushes to crash the practice round trio of Fred Couples, Jay Haas, and Curtis Strange. Wearing an obvious wig and visor, Couples said his first tee shot nearly took a spectator's head off. Couples said he and the others didn't really mind, though. Bremen just did his thing despite people screaming, "Who is this guy?" Bremen also famously made appearances at the 1979 Major League All-Star Game wearing a New York Yankees uniform after shagging some fly balls during batting practice and nearly inserting himself discreetly in a team photo. He was noticed by U.S. Secret Service officers there protecting President Gerald Ford, and he promptly was escorted out of Seattle's Kingdome, arrested, and he had to pay a fine. After it was obvious he'd aged out of being a player, he started to assume the roles of officials. He pulled his best Enrico Palazzo impersonation as an ump prior to Game 1 of the 1980 World Series, chatting it up with the legit umps and then standing with them for the national anthem before leaving on his own. That stunt he got away with completely. Now, one he did not. He attempted to ref Super Bowl 15, but he was noticed when he was wearing the same ref number as another official who was already there. His most audacious stunt, though, may have been non-sports related when he boldly stepped on stage to accept the Emmy Award for Best Supporting Actress in the place of Betty Thomas, who'd won for her role in Hill Street Blues. Thomas was actually in the audience that night and was stunned to see a man she did not know leaving the stage with the award that she had won. Bremen became a minor celebrity of sorts for his exploits and made appearances on David Letterman and The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson. ESPN actually did a 30 for 30 short documentary film on him back in 2014. On this day in 1997, an unlikely hero emerged in the NBA Finals. This was Game 6 between the Chicago Bulls and the Utah Jazz. The Bulls were up 3-2 and hoping to close the series out at home. With the game tied at 86 and the clock winding down under 20 seconds, everybody in the building, watching on television, listening on the radio, knew that the ball was going to wind up in Michael Jordan's hands. In a timeout prior to this, though, Jordan envisioned what would happen, and he looked into the eyes of Steve Kerr and he said, "This is your chance. I know Stockton is going to come over and help on me, and I'm going to come to you." Kerr stared back and, despite having missed several key buckets in the series already, replied, "I'll be ready. I'll knock it down." Jordan didn't have to be clairvoyant to know the double team was coming, and when it did, he spotted Kerr wide open at the free throw line all alone. This is what it sounded like that night.
Kerr still with a dribble. Looking, dump to Pippen. Scotty, bumped by Shandon Anderson, handed to Michael. 6 seconds, 5. Michael in traffic to Kerr, 15-footer. Kerr burying the jumper, 5 seconds left. The Bulls lead is 2. Stevie Kerr knocked it in. He took the pass from Michael and stuck the jumper. Wow.
Kerr's bucket put the Bulls up 2, but there were still 5 seconds on the clock, and the Jazz got the ball at midcourt after a timeout. More than enough time for Utah to get a good shot to tie or even win it. But Scottie Pippen anticipated the pass, knocked it toward the backcourt, dove on the ground for the ball, and in the process, fed Tony Kukoc for the decisive dunk to give the Bulls the 4-point win. It was the 5th of their 6 titles they would win. At the championship celebration a few days later, Kerr had some fun in his retelling of the discussion in the huddle prior to his big shot.
A lot of people have been asking me about the shot the other night, and there have been some misconceptions about what actually happened. I wanted to clear it up. When we called timeout with 25 seconds to go, we went into the huddle, and Phil told Michael, he said, "Michael, I want you to take the last shot." And Michael said, "You know, Phil, I don't feel real comfortable in these situations, so maybe we ought to go in another direction." And then Scotty came in and said, "You know, Phil, Michael said in his commercial that, you know, he's been asked to do this 26 times and he's failed. So why don't we go to Steve?"
On this day in 1989, it was the coronation of the Detroit Pistons as NBA champs and the sad farewell to one of the league's greatest players. The Pistons were playing the magicless Los Angeles Lakers. In the first 3 games of the series, the Pistons had dominated the 2-time defending champs. The Lakers had a little fight left in them, though. Powered by James Worthy's 40 points on the night, the Lakers shot out to a 16-point lead in the first. But Joe Dumars, Vinnie Johnson, and Isaiah Thomas counterpunched, combining for 51 to bring Detroit back. But it was the basketball Buddha, James Edwards, that drove the nail in the Lakers' coffin, scoring 13 points in the fourth quarter to give the Pistons the 105-97 win and their first NBA championship in 40 years, when they used to be known as the Fort Wayne Pistons. With 19 seconds left in the game, the Lakers removed Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, and he received a standing ovation from the LA Forum crowd. It was Kareem's final game in his spectacular 20-year career, retiring then as the NBA's all-time leading scorer. Of course, that mark has since been eclipsed by LeBron James. On this day in 1935, it was the Cinderella Man bout in Madison Square Garden. 26-year-old Max Baer was a hard-hitting heavyweight champ. So hard a puncher was he that 5 years earlier in 1930, his opponent, Frankie Campbell, died as a result of the beating he had taken by Baer. Ernie Schaff was another boxer that suffered damage at the hands of Baer, and when he died after a bout with Primo Carnera, people pointed at the beating Baer had given him in an earlier fight as partial cause for his death. Baer had become heavyweight champ 364 days prior to this fight with a defeat of Carnera. In the other corner on this night was 29-year-old James J. Braddock. He had fought in the light heavyweight class and in his early boxing years had amassed a record of 44-2-2, with 21 of his 44 wins coming as knockouts. In a 1929 fight with Tommy Loughran, Braddock lost a 15-round decision and he broke his right hand during that fight. After that, he struggled, losing 20 of his next 33. He was struggling in the ring and also out of it. This was the Great Depression and times were tough for just about everybody. He gave up boxing and became a longshoreman, but even that was not enough, and he wound up on the New Jersey government relief roll. In 1934, he was offered a spot in the ring again against Corn Griffin. Now, Braddock was supposed to be a sacrificial lamb, but he was hoping for a decent payday. Instead, Braddock knocked out Griffin in the third round. In March 1935, he won another fight, drawing the attention of Baer's camp as a credible fighter, but also as an easy mark and a payday and a title defense. Braddock entered the ring on this night 19 pounds lighter than Baer and was a huge 10-1 underdog. But Baer didn't seem to take the fight very seriously. Ringside accounts talk of the heavyweight champ clowning around during the fight and not acting like a champion. Through the first 6 rounds, Baer looked lethargic as both boxers traded punches and plodded around the ring. In the 7th, Baer's mentality shifted and he started landing hard body shots to Braddock. But Braddock stood tall and took every one of them, returning counterpunches in the process. Now, Baer was surprised at how much punishment Braddock was taking and not wilting. The fight went the full 15 rounds, with Braddock winning in a unanimous decision and taking the heavyweight title to shock the boxing world with a real-life rags-to-riches tale. Sports writer Damon Runyon coined the phrase the Cinderella Man to describe Braddock in his write-up of the fight. That later became the title of the 2005 movie directed by Ron Howard and starring Russell Crowe as Braddock. And time now for today's That's Got Nothing to Do with Sports fun fact. Though about 0.5% of today's population contains DNA handed down by Genghis Khan, nobody knows what he actually looked like, how he died, or where his remains are buried. Artists were prohibited from drawing his image while he was alive. Artists recreated his image after his death, but those images vary wildly depending on the culture and the interactions that those folks who had actually seen him had with the ruthless ruler. Rumors about how he died also vary a great deal. He was buried in an unmarked grave, and 1,000 horses rode over the area to disguise his gravesite. Archaeologists are still looking for it, with very little information to go on. This has been an original Thrive Suite production.